I never thought I'd see my beloved barn hijacked by an over-the-top bachelorette party. But that's exactly what happened when Karen, our self-proclaimed HOA queen, barged in with her entourage. We've all known at least one HOA Karen in our neighborhood, right? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Buckle up, because this drama will show you just how far one determined neighbor will go to claim what she thinks is hers. I've lived in this neighborhood for 5 years, and for most of that time my barn and horses went blissfully unnoticed. We're tucked along the outskirts of a suburban enclave where identical houses line manicured streets. My property is just far enough away that no one thought much of it, until Karen took charge of our HOA. She wasn't always the big name around here. In fact, she used to be just another neighbor who complained about minor issues like tree branches overhanging sidewalks. That all changed when she ran for president of the Homeowners Association. I remember the flyers she posted everywhere, promising she would increase property values and bring harmony to the community. A lot of people bought into her platform, seeing her as a go-getter with a polished smile. Little did they realize that behind that smile was a relentless personality set on micromanaging everyone's life. At first, Karen's demands seemed harmless. She'd send out bulletins about curb appeal or new color schemes for shutters. A few neighbors grumbled, but most complied to keep the peace. I tried to stay under the radar, especially since my barn already had that natural rustic look which didn't exactly match the polished lawns. Still, I didn't worry. My land was zoned for agricultural use before it got absorbed into the HOA territory. I figured I had legal standing to maintain my horses without too much interference. Then, out of nowhere, Karen began showing more than a casual interest in my place. She'd pass by during her routine inspections of the neighborhood, standing at the edge of my property with a clipboard in hand, studying my barn. Whenever I locked eyes with her, she'd wave stiffly, her tight smile never reaching her eyes. Something about it always made me uneasy. I caught the first real whiff of trouble when she knocked on my door one afternoon, brandishing a sheet of HOA letterhead. On it was a polite but firm request to revisit the current color of the barn exterior. Supposedly it wasn't consistent with the latest guidelines for visual cohesion. That alone might not have bothered me if not for the second paragraph, which asked me to consider whether the barn's function could be enhanced to serve broader community gatherings, subject to HOA approval. The nerve of that suggestion set my teeth on edge. Why on earth would I want to host community gatherings in a space I used for my horses, feed storage, and personal retreat? I invited her inside so we could talk calmly. She started lecturing me on how the HOA's mission was to optimize every property for the collective good. "You have so much unused potential," she cooed, peering out my living room window at the barn. "Think of the possibilities. Weddings, parties, even craft fairs. It could be a real asset to everyone." I forced a smile and explained how this was my private property and that my horse's well-being came first. Karen pursed her lips, her eyes steely. "We'll revisit this," she said. "Don't forget, the HOA sets policy for the community." That same evening, I told my friend and fellow neighbor Luke what she'd said. Luke had been around longer than me and warned, "Karen's not shy about throwing her weight around. Last year she tried to force a neighbor to remove a wheelchair ramp because she felt it didn't blend in with the porch design." I was appalled. "That's outrageous," I replied. Luke nodded grimly. "Just be ready. She'll keep pushing." Push she did. The next 2 weeks were a barrage of short notes slipped under my door, all with that same official letterhead, instructing me to rectify small violations I didn't even know existed. She claimed my horse trailer needed to be stored in a less visible spot, that I had to repaint the barn door to match the fence, and that the fence itself should be no taller than a certain number of feet. "Are you kidding me?" I muttered, reading each note with growing frustration. I knew she was singling me out, and it stung. One morning as I tossed hay in the stalls, I noticed a group of strangers walking around the perimeter of my barn snapping pictures. They looked like event planners or decorators wearing matching polo shirts embroidered with a local wedding service logo. Confused, I asked if I could help them. One bright-eyed woman chirped, "We're here to scope the venue for an upcoming celebration." My jaw dropped. "What venue?" I sputtered. She blinked, consulting her phone. "Karen told us your barn was perfect for a bachelorette party. Didn't she tell you?" That was my official introduction to the horrifying idea that Karen had earmarked my barn for her personal event. My shock quickly turned to outrage, but these folks had no clue they were trespassing at Karen's behest. I politely asked them to leave, explaining I hadn't agreed to any such thing. They departed looking thoroughly perplexed, promising to check with Karen. Storm clouds gathered in my head as I replayed the conversation. Karen was obviously moving full speed ahead on some plan to commandeer my barn. On paper, it might sound comical. Who crashes a barn for a bachelorette party? But the seriousness of the intrusion made my stomach churn. If she could brazenly invite vendors onto my land, what else was she capable of? I fired off a formal complaint to the HOA board, attaching photos of the trespassing planners. Then I emailed Karen directly, demanding an explanation. Her response was chillingly dismissive. "You'll find that the majority of the board supports a community-sharing approach to underutilized structures. This is beneficial for everyone. I suggest you cooperate to avoid potential compliance actions." That last sentence made me see red. Threatening me with compliance actions for refusing a private party on my own property was next-level bullying. I confided in Luke again. He advised me to gather as much evidence as possible, logs of every conversation, photos, anything that proved Karen was acting outside her authority. "She's counting on you to fold," he said. "Most people do, because they're afraid of legal costs or fines. But if you stand firm and document everything, you might have a chance to push back successfully." I nodded, though my gut clenched at the prospect of a lengthy fight. Sure enough, official-looking letters started arriving in my mailbox, citing obscure HOA clauses. Each one demanded compliance with different guidelines, some about landscaping, others about permissible structures or exterior aesthetics. It was as if Karen had combed through every rule in existence to find ways to make my life miserable. I spent evenings poring over these documents, cross-referencing them with my property's zoning rights, and drafting responses to refute her claims. Meanwhile, rumors about Karen's engagement circulated. Her fiancé apparently worked in another city, so few people had met him. The talk of a bachelorette party ramped up, and I even overheard neighbors speculating that Karen planned something grand and flashy. "She wants it to be the event of the season," one woman whispered, rolling her eyes. A chill ran down my spine. Grand, flashy, and in my barn? The next escalation arrived in the form of a letter Karen posted on the community bulletin board. It was addressed to all residents, praising the upcoming hoax-sponsored bridal event and reminding everyone to be supportive of new traditions. She mentioned a spacious venue that reflects our neighborhood's rustic charm, an obvious allusion to my barn. The letter ended with a line that nearly made me rip it off the board in fury. "We look forward to uniting the community in a celebration that utilizes our shared assets." Shared assets, as if my barn was nothing but a communal resource. I stormed home and wrote a scathing reply which I intended to pin beneath her letter. Luke stopped me, cautioning that I might want to keep the high ground. He was right. Instead, I took pictures of the bulletin, wrote a calm but firm statement clarifying that no arrangement has been made nor approved by the rightful property owner for the use of a private barn, and handed copies to a few neighbors I trusted. The last thing I needed was for the entire neighborhood to believe I was somehow endorsing or supporting her plan. Days ticked by with an anxious dread building in my chest. Karen's silence on the matter was almost more unnerving than her constant letters. Then, about a week later, as I was refilling the horses' water troughs, a group of caterers arrived in a van, along with a couple of men carrying speaker equipment. They started unloading under the assumption everything was set for the big night. I could feel my pulse pound in my temples. This was the moment of truth. Either I let them set up or I stand my ground. "Stop," I commanded, stepping in front of them. "This is private property. Who gave you permission to unload here?" One of the caterers fumbled with his clipboard, reading off a name. "Karen," he replied. "We have a contract to set up for tomorrow's bachelorette party. She told us the barn would be cleared." My jaw clenched. Karen does not own this barn. She had no right to promise its use. The caterers exchanged bewildered looks. One of them asked if I wanted them to leave. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "Unless you have express written permission from me, the property owner, you must leave now." They left, but the tension stayed. I knew Karen would see this as an open challenge, and open challenges are what she thrived on. Sure enough, that evening I found a neon pink piece of paper taped to my front door. It was from Karen, stating, "We have a disagreement about rightful use. I'm sure the board will clarify this soon. In the meantime, do not jeopardize my scheduled event." My hands shook with anger. How dare she waltz onto my land, claim it as her party space, and then accuse me of jeopardizing things? I tried to rest that night, but my mind wouldn't turn off. Tomorrow was apparently the day of her bachelorette party. I kept thinking, maybe she'll realize I won't budge. But something told me Karen wouldn't be so easily deterred. She'd gone too far to step back gracefully. And so I prepared for the worst. Luke offered to come by and stand witness. I took him up on it. We also set up a couple of cameras around the barn just in case we needed hard evidence. The entire situation felt surreal, like gearing up for some bizarre siege. By dawn, I noticed a flurry of activity near the entrance of my property. Cars slowed as they passed, as if people were scoping out the location. Around noon, a beat-up pickup arrived with more event supplies: folding tables, cases of wine, boxes labeled decor. I repeated my line about it being private property, turning them away. Then, around 3 p.m., an SUV arrived with a group of women. Some in matching robes, obviously bridesmaids. They piled out, squealing about Karen's big night. It took all my willpower not to blow a fuse. Luke stepped in, calmly explaining they'd gotten the wrong venue. One bridesmaid whined, "But Karen said we'd have the barn from late afternoon till midnight." The nerve of it all. As people came and went in confusion, my horses grew restless. They'd never seen so many unfamiliar cars or smelled so many strangers at once. Storm, my lead mare, nickered anxiously, pacing by the stall door. I tried to soothe her, offering gentle words. Inside, I was as nervous as she was. If Karen showed up with a large, rowdy crowd, I had no idea how my horses would handle it. Then, just after 5 p.m., the main caravan pulled up. A long limousine, several SUVs, and multiple sedans lined the edge of my fence. Partygoers spilled out, half of them already looking buzzed. Someone was blasting music from a portable speaker. The bridesmaids I'd turned away earlier cheered when Karen stepped out wearing an obnoxiously bright sash reading, "Bride-to-be." I could see her scanning the property until her eyes landed on me. I stiffened, preparing for the confrontation. She sauntered over, ignoring Luke, ignoring the cameras. "I'm done playing around," she snapped. "Our guests are here, the board's on my side. Now either open that barn or face the consequences of defying an HOA mandate." I forced myself to remain calm. "This is trespassing," I said, voice low. "You do not have my permission." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "I have the authority," she said. "Stop making this difficult." With a dismissive flick of her wrist, she motioned for the party to move toward the barn. My stomach twisted as I watched them pour through the gate, carrying coolers, decorations, and a bizarre array of party items. This wasn't some polite gathering with light refreshments. This looked like a full-blown, alcohol-fueled bash. I exchanged a glance with Luke, who whispered, "You want me to call the cops?" I hesitated, worried that sirens might spook the horses. "Let's see if we can defuse this," I replied quietly. Deep down, I doubted it was possible. Within minutes, the place was transformed. Neon lights blinked in the barn's entryway. A pop-up bar appeared near the tack room. Loud chatter mingled with the restless snorts of my horses. I kept thinking, this can't be real. Karen strutted around, pointing at stalls as if they were decor for her party. The music got louder, culminating in heavy bass that rattled the wooden beams. By now, some of the men, groomsmen perhaps, were already guzzling beer, roaming the barn like it was a cheap party venue. Storm tossed her head in alarm, and the other horses followed suit, stomping and whining. I knew I had to act before one of them got hurt or hurt someone else. I marched up to Karen, who was in the middle of taking selfies with a group of bridesmaids. "Turn the music down," I demanded. "You're scaring the horses." She smirked, snapping another photo before replying, "Relax, it's one night. They're just animals, they'll cope." Her callousness was breathtaking. Furious, I stormed over to the speaker and yanked the power cable, plunging the barn into sudden silence. Heads turned. Karen spun around. "What are you doing?" she shrieked. "Saving my property. And possibly your lives," I hissed. "You're terrifying the horses. Everyone needs to leave right now." A chorus of protests erupted. Some guests grumbled about the party being ruined. A couple of them started chanting Karen's name, urging me to plug the music back in. Two of the groomsmen stumbled toward me, chest puffed out like they were prepared for a fight. Luke stepped between us, calmly stating, "Back off, guys." Karen glared daggers at me. "You're going to regret this," she said through clenched teeth, before yelling at one of the men to restore the power. That was precisely the kind of tension that made my horses spook. The abrupt yelling, the stomping feet. Storm let out a sharp whinny and kicked at her stall door. The impact rang out like a gunshot, scattering a nearby knot of partygoers. Another horse bucked, slamming against the wooden divider. Drinks spilled, people cursed, and fear flashed across faces. It was as if my horses collectively decided, enough is enough. Amid the chaos, a drunk groomsman thought it a brilliant idea to approach Storm, arms raised, slurring, "Whoa there, calm down." Big mistake. Storm felt threatened, and with a flick of her tail, she reared, hooves scraping the air. The man jumped back, stumbling over a bale of hay. The near miss of a powerful hoof to his skull was terrifying. Screams erupted from the guests, now fully realizing these were large, frightened animals, not photo props. Karen stood in the center, eyes wild, trying to regain control, but it was pointless. The rapid chain reaction of panic among the horses was unstoppable. A second horse kicked, splintering another stall door. One bridesmaid screamed at a pitch that could shatter glass. People shoved each other, trying to get out of the barn, shrieking about killer horses. It would have been comical if it wasn't so dangerous. I scrambled to unfasten the main barn door, hoping to coax the horses outside before the frenzy escalated further. Luke helped me open gates, the two of us shouting for the partiers to clear a path. Karen continued screaming, "Don't let them out! They'll destroy everything!" But the only alternative was letting them rampage within the confined space. "Move!" I hollered, swinging the door wide. Storm and two other horses bolted for the open air, hooves thundering as they tore past a crowd that dove aside. In the sudden stampede, at least one table got flipped, sending cups and bottles flying. A groomsman tumbled into a portable speaker, smashing it to pieces. Another man howled about spraining his ankle. My entire barn reeked of spilt liquor and raw fear. The lights flickered as someone must have tripped over a power cable. As soon as the horses were out, I hurried after them, worried they might flee into the road. Thankfully, they stuck to the fenced area behind the barn, still edgy but less confined. Luke stayed behind to ensure no one was pinned or trampled. Moments later, I heard a series of curses and the unmistakable sound of Karen berating me at full volume. I turned to see her storming out of the barn, hair disheveled, mascara running. "You'll pay for this damage," she hollered. "I'm charging you with reckless endangerment. I'll sue you for every cent." I just stared at her, breathless from the chaos. "You invaded my property, ignored my warnings, and terrified my horses," I countered, voice raw with anger. "This is on you." She looked near apoplectic, like no one had ever dared defy her so blatantly. Then, as if on cue, a bright flash lit the scene, a guest's phone camera capturing her meltdown. Karen whirled on the photographer. "Stop filming!" But it was too late. Multiple cameras were trained on her. "You!" One bridesmaid, shaking and teary-eyed, shouted, "You lied to us! You said the barn was rented!" Another voice piped in, "I'm never trusting your HOA authority again." It was mass pandemonium, complete with a bride-to-be meltdown. The entire fiasco was so far beyond anything I'd ever imagined happening on my quiet property. Police sirens wailed in the distance. A neighbor must have called them. Karen's eyes went wide. "No, no, no," she muttered, stumbling back toward the barn's entrance. Guests scattered, some actually trying to salvage their belongings. Others left in a rush, too shaken to keep partying. I spotted at least one bridesmaid heading for the limousine, throwing her hands in the air as if to say, "I'm done." I exhaled, heart pounding. In a single evening, everything had descended into pure anarchy, all because Karen believed my barn was hers to use. As the red and blue lights swirled on the driveway, I took a moment to check on my horses, grateful none of them appeared seriously harmed. Storm was trembling but otherwise okay, her chest heaving with residual panic. I stroked her flank, whispering, "It's over now." Even as I said the words, I knew the aftermath had only just begun. The police arrived to a scene of confusion. Multiple vehicles were parked haphazardly. Half of the partygoers were missing shoes or stumbling around the yard, and the barn still reverberated with the echo of slammed stall doors. One officer stepped out, scanned the crowd, and asked, "Who's the property owner?" I raised my hand, exhausted and covered in sweat. Karen, mascara streaking her cheeks, also stepped forward, declaring herself, "Hope's Hope, Hope's Hope." Hope stared at her, disbelief, still hoping her cheeks would be the color of Hope's hope. The officer blinked, clearly trying to piece it all together. Luke immediately approached, giving a concise version of the story. Karen had invaded my barn, claiming it for a bachelorette party, ignoring my property rights. The horses panicked, causing near injuries and significant damage. "We have videos," he added, tapping his phone. Several shaken guests nodded in agreement, ready to confirm what had happened. Karen attempted to spin it, talking over Luke. She insisted it was an HOA-approved function. She spouted claims that I had unleashed the horses intentionally to disrupt her celebration. Her voice quivered with anger as she pointed at me, saying I'd be liable for the chaos. The officer frowned. "Did the homeowner give you explicit permission to hold this event here?" he asked, eyebrows raised. She sputtered, dancing around the truth with vague references to community property guidelines. He repeated the question. Finally, Karen reluctantly admitted she never got my formal approval. At that, the officer turned to me. "Did you invite them?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, I told them to leave multiple times." His gaze shifted to the guests. "Did you see him forcibly bring the horses out?" A bridesmaid stepped forward, hugging herself with trembling arms. "No, the horses freaked out because we were playing loud music. He was just trying to open the barn door to help them." The more Karen tried to talk her way out, the deeper she sank. Another officer examined the scattered cups, the portable bar, and the broken decorations. The entire barn was trashed. Storm and 2 other horses were still outside, visibly uneasy. The glow of the police car lights painted the scene in a stark mixture of red and blue. Finally, the lead officer sighed. "All right, folks, party's over. Let's disperse." He motioned to the handful of lingering guests. One groomsman slurred something under his breath about wanting to press charges for assault by an animal. The officer shook his head, unimpressed. "You want to claim a horse assaulted you after you showed up here uninvited?" The groomsman just blinked, then staggered away. A flurry of activity followed as people packed up whatever they could salvage. The caterers had long fled, so half-eaten platters sat abandoned. After a bit of back and forth, the police took my statement and Karen's. She kept ranting about my rights as HOA president, but it wasn't swaying them. Her fiancé, nowhere in sight during the fiasco, finally appeared near the sidewalk, looking mortified at the scene. He seemed about to speak to her, but she snapped something at him and he stepped back. When the officers finished collecting information, one approached me again. "We're not placing anyone under arrest right now, unless you want to press charges for trespassing." I considered it, but after glancing at my frazzled horses, I decided I needed time to think. "I'll follow up," I said. The officer nodded and advised me to document everything. Karen tried to interject about my liability for letting horses run free, but the officer merely gave her a flat look, saying, "We'll add your statement to the report, ma'am." Before leaving, the police made sure the main group of partiers vacated my property. Some hopped into the limousine, others into their cars. Karen, oddly enough, lingered, shouting orders to a few stragglers about gathering leftover decorations. I was too drained to argue anymore. Luke and I started picking up trash, mostly to ensure the horses didn't ingest anything dangerous. Finally, Karen and her fiancé got in their SUV. As she shut the door, she locked eyes with me through the window, mouthing something that looked like, "This isn't over." A jolt of resentment flared, but I was too tired to respond. She drove off, leaving me standing amid the wreckage. Darkness settled in. The barn was a mess, reeking of spilled alcohol and the sweat of frightened animals. Luke helped me haul out broken chairs and scattered glassware, placing them in a corner far from the stalls. My legs ached, and my pulse still thrummed with residual adrenaline. "You did the right thing," Luke said quietly. "She was never going to back down otherwise." I nodded, unscrewing a half-crushed can of beer from the floor. "I just can't believe she'd go this far," I muttered, using her HOA title to bully me, ignoring the safety of everyone, including the horses. Luke patted my shoulder. "I've seen some power-hungry folks in my time, but she's next level." We both knew I'd have to brace for the next phase, dealing with the fallout, because people like Karen rarely accept defeat peacefully. The following day, I woke to find social media posts about the barn fiasco. Short videos showed the chaos, from drunken dancing to Storm's panicked kick. In one clip, Karen could be seen shouting, "You'll pay for this," right after a stall door banged open. Comments ranged from disbelief to anger at Karen's blatant disregard for my property. Some neighbors chimed in, claiming they'd had run-ins with her over petty violations. Others seemed to find the whole episode wildly entertaining, with memes about Karen's catastrophic barn takeover. Meanwhile, I had to face the physical damage. Stall doors were splintered, some bales of hay trashed, feed sacks torn open, plus a variety of bizarre debris, confetti, plastic cups, half-eaten wedding cookies. My horses remained jumpy, especially Storm, who pinned her ears back whenever she heard a loud noise. I spent the morning quietly cleaning, letting them graze in the corral for fresh air and calmness. Now and then I'd overhear the distant hum of a car passing by, possibly rubbernecking the aftermath. By midday, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. When I answered, it was Ms. Dahl, a senior member of the HOA board. She apologized profusely, explaining that Karen had never secured official board approval for her party. "We're mortified," she said. "Several of us had no idea she planned to hold an event on your property. She claimed you'd volunteered." My laugh was hollow. "Volunteered?" "She threatened me with fines if I didn't comply." Ms. Dahl paused, voice tinged with regret. "This is not how we want our HOA represented. There will be a special session to address her behavior." I thanked her but remained guarded. I knew Karen still wielded influence over some board members, plus she had a knack for twisting stories. Even so, it was validating to hear the higher-ups recognize the fiasco as her fault. Ms. Dahl promised they'd keep me informed, encouraging me to present any evidence or statements at the upcoming session. That evening, I wrote a chronological account of events, attaching all the images and videos Luke and I had. The next day, Luke and I visited a local attorney, who glanced over the files and agreed Karen's actions were blatantly unauthorized. He recommended I countersue if Karen tried anything. "Don't let her bully you with empty threats," he said. "People like that bank on intimidation, but the law is on your side." My biggest concern, of course, was the well-being of my horses. Storm, in particular, showed signs of lasting anxiety, flinching at abrupt noises. I spent hours brushing her mane, talking softly, re-establishing trust. The idea that she'd been put in a situation where she felt forced to defend herself still enraged me. A few nights later, a white sedan pulled up in front of my property just as I finished evening chores. Out stepped a woman with a sympathetic smile, a local journalist who'd heard about the fiasco through social media. She asked if I'd be willing to give my side of the story. Part of me hesitated. Airing dirty laundry might worsen tensions. But another part wanted people to know how deeply Karen had abused her authority. I agreed, making sure to stick to factual details. The article ran online under the headline, "Bachelorette Barn Brawl, When an HOA President Goes Too Far." Within hours, it racked up comments. Some readers ridiculed Karen's sense of entitlement, others sympathized with me, expressing horror at the animal's plight. A smaller contingent argued I was being dramatic, that maybe the horses weren't truly in danger, but the images and videos told a strong story. Guests fleeing hooves, frantic whinnies echoing in a place that should have been peaceful. Karen's response appeared in a follow-up piece. She painted herself as a victim who'd arranged a friendly social event and been confronted by an irrational homeowner. Her meltdown was conspicuously absent from her account, and she claimed the horses had been deliberately set loose. The spin was laughable to anyone who'd seen the footage. Nonetheless, she used it to rally a few diehard supporters. I saw one person comment, "Karen is the best thing that happened to our HOA. That guy with the horses is a troublemaker. Good grief." Soon Ms. Dahl emailed me the date of the special HOA board session. I braced for drama. Karen's fate hung in the balance, and I suspected she'd put up a fight. When the day arrived, I walked into the clubhouse, surprised by the big turnout. Residents filled rows of metal chairs, some curious. She shot me a glare that could peel paint. I ignored her, taking a seat up front. Ms. Dahl and two other senior board members led the meeting. They began by stating the reason: to address serious allegations of misconduct involving HOA leadership. Karen tried to interrupt, but Ms. Dahl politely asked her to wait. Then they invited me to speak. I recounted the entire sequence, from her pushy letters to the night of the bachelorette party gone berserk. Next, I showed a short video compilation, Karen ignoring my refusal, guests partying in the barn, Storm's panicked kick, and Karen's final meltdown. A hush fell over the room as the images played. Even some of Karen's supporters looked uneasy. When it was Karen's turn, she flipped through papers, rattling off half-truths. She claimed the board had given her implied consent, that she tried to coordinate with me, but I unleashed dangerous animals. Ms. Dahl asked for any documentation of my supposed consent. Karen couldn't produce a single valid signature. She repeatedly referenced an obscure clause about common use structures, but Ms. Dahl pointed out that it applied to shared facilities like playgrounds or gazebos, not privately owned barns zoned for livestock. Karen's voice got shriller by the minute. Some neighbors stood up, offering testimonies. One bride-to-be meltdown witness recounted how Karen explicitly told them I was fully on board even though I'd never agreed. Another neighbor said Karen had used the same intimidation tactics to force them into painting their fence. It was like watching a dam burst. People came forward, airing grievances about her overreaching behavior. Every minute, Karen's face grew paler. Finally, Ms. Dahl conferred with the other board members. She delivered the verdict. Karen was found in violation of multiple HOA principles, had acted without proper board approval, and caused reputational harm to the association by commandeering my barn. The board passed a motion removing Karen from her position as HOA president. She'd also face personal liability for any fines or damages resulting from the unauthorized party. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Karen looked shell-shocked, then furious. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "This is a joke," she hissed. "I made this community better. You're all ungrateful." Grabbing her fiancé's arm, she stalked out, ignoring the cluster of reporters who rushed toward her. I felt a weight lift from my chest. The meltdown in my barn was over. Now justice had finally caught up with her. Ms. Dahl shook my hand, apologizing for everything I'd endured. "We'll work on a settlement regarding the damages," she promised. "The board wants to make this right." I thanked her, relieved. Neighbors approached, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner, others praising me for taking a stand. I was just glad the ordeal had a real resolution at last. With Karen deposed as HOA president, the immediate storm began to pass. Word spread quickly that she'd lost her position. I noticed fewer official-looking letters in my mailbox, fewer random inspections near my fence line. The sense of constant scrutiny finally lifted. My barn, while still showing signs of that wild night's aftermath, felt like mine again, a sanctuary rather than an embattled outpost. Local chatter revealed Karen had retreated from public view. Her fiancé, rumored to be furious about the negative spotlight, apparently argued they should hold their wedding out of town. A handful of Karen's loyal supporters publicly distanced themselves, insisting they had no idea what she'd done. Those who'd wavered before took her downfall as proof that it was safe to speak out against unfair HOA practices. I spent the next several weekends repairing the barn interior. Friends and neighbors pitched in, grateful I'd confronted Karen's antics. We replaced splintered stall doors, scrubbed sticky floors, and hammered loose boards back into place. Each time I swept up shattered glass or found a stray piece of confetti stuck in a corner, I was reminded of that chaotic night. It took real elbow grease to restore the barn's old charm, but I found a certain catharsis in the process. Storm and the others settled down too, once the noise and unexpected crowds ceased. I even brought in an equine therapist to ensure none of them had lasting trauma. A combination of gentle handling and routine soon helped them relax. Meanwhile, the HOA board organized a meeting to propose new guidelines aimed at preventing future abuses of power. A revised bylaw clarified that no individual, not even the president, could unilaterally repurpose private property for HOA events without explicit written permission. The board also established better oversight, so major decisions required group consensus and transparent records. Some residents joked they should name the new policy the No Karen Clause. Ms. Dahl, though, insisted on something more formal. For my part, I refused to run for any HOA position, even though several neighbors urged me to. "We need someone like you who'll stand up for homeowners," they said. While I appreciated the sentiment, I had no desire to get entangled in the politics. I just wanted to return to my peaceful routine with my horses. Let others manage the day-to-day workings of the association, as long as they did it fairly. The fiasco had drained me enough. In the broader community, the story of Karen's brazen Bachelorette takeover became local legend. The memes persisted online, snapshots of her meltdown with captions like, "When you think you own everything," or HOA, or "Hostile Occupation Army." Teenagers who hardly knew me teased about the Great Barn Battle. It was embarrassing in some ways, but also gratifying that so many people recognized how outrageous her behavior had been. I discovered that the police report, combined with the statements from that night, was enough to dissuade Karen from filing any lawsuit against me. My attorney confirmed no official claim had been lodged. "Typical bully," he said. "They threaten, then back down when the law isn't on their side." I took comfort in knowing she was unlikely to reappear in my driveway. A lingering sense of vigilance remained, but life mostly returned to normal. That normalcy included daily horse care, grooming Storm especially, to reassure her that everything was all right now. The bond between us felt stronger, as though we'd gone through a shared trial. I found a peaceful rhythm again, waking at dawn to feed them, hearing their soft nickers that reminded me why I fell in love with this lifestyle in the first place. One morning, as I was mucking out stalls, Luke stopped by. He leaned against a post, surveying the now clean barn. "Looks like you've nearly erased all signs of the fiasco," he remarked. "Any last confetti bombs lurking around?" I laughed. "I hope not. I vacuumed enough glitter to last a lifetime." Then he turned serious. "You know, you really changed things around here, right? For years, people were terrified of Karen's fines or intimidation. Now they see she can be challenged and beaten." His words humbled me. I hadn't set out to be a crusader, just to protect my horses and property. Yet that's how big change often starts, one personal stand shining a light on broader abuses. I never wanted to be the neighborhood hero, I admitted, just someone who can keep a barn without it becoming party central. Luke grinned. Well, sometimes heroes are the ones who do exactly that, protect their barn from Bachelorette insanity. We parted ways and I thought about the ripple effect of taking on Karen. Sure, I was exhausted, but the payoff was a freer, fairer neighborhood. Residents were sharing stories, reevaluating old finds, demanding accountability. Ms. Dahl told me they were even planning to host a workshop on HOA best practices to avoid future fiascos. If that meant no other neighbor would face what I faced, then it was worth it. Eventually, the board asked if I wanted restitution for the physical damages. They offered to dip into discretionary HOA funds, which ironically Karen had once controlled. I submitted an itemized list: barn repairs, stall door replacements, new feed. It felt strange, accepting money linked to an entity I'd grown to distrust, but Ms. Dahl assured me it was only fair. The board approved partial compensation, enough to make a dent in my expenses. Between that and neighbors volunteering labor, I came out mostly whole. Still, a faint bitterness lingered. The fiasco had cost me time, energy, and a sense of security. I'd lost faith in an institution meant to foster community spirit. Even with Karen gone, the memory of her brazen infiltration remained. Some nights I'd stand in the barn, imagining the music pounding and lights flashing. The moment Storm kicked in fear, a chill ran down my spine at how easily it all spiraled out of control. But then I'd look at Storm, relaxed and safe, and remember, we overcame it. A couple of months later, a calm settled over the neighborhood that felt new and refreshing. Gone were Karen's oppressive rules about mailbox heights and mandated flower colors. People walked their dogs without worrying about being cited for not having the approved leash style. In fact, an upcoming community barbecue was planned, officially sanctioned by the new HOA leadership, and no one felt forced to attend. For the first time since Karen's tenure began, the place felt like a genuine neighborhood rather than a petty dictatorship. I was invited to that barbecue. Part of me hesitated, still worn out from the drama, but Ms. Dahl reached out personally, promising no one would hijack my evening. "We just want to celebrate a fresh start," she said. So I showed up, made small talk with folks who recognized me from the fiasco. Some approached to express gratitude, others to share relief that we were free from Karen's tyranny. A few apologized for not intervening sooner. I accepted their gestures graciously, understanding it's never easy to stand up to someone who acts like a tyrant. The barbecue was low-key and pleasant. Everything Karen's wild party was not. Kids played tag around the picnic tables, a local band strummed easy tunes, and neighbors swapped stories while flipping burgers. No disco lights, no invasive bar setups, just a gentle sense of community. Watching it unfold, I felt a poignant mixture of contentment and lingering sadness. Contentment because the neighborhood was healing, sadness because it took such an extreme crisis for people to come together. I left early, heading home to check on the horses. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. Storm wandered over to the fence when she saw me approach, her big dark eyes calm now. I scratched behind her ears. "It's finally back to normal," I murmured. She pressed her head gently into my hand as if to say she approved of that statement. A few days later, I received a letter with the new HOA letterhead. No more mention of Karen. It formally confirmed that the board recognized my barn as private property, exempt from communal usage unless I explicitly chose to volunteer it. I tucked that document into my desk drawer, smiling at the bittersweet irony that I needed a fiasco to secure such a basic right. Better late than never. Word reached me that Karen's wedding was postponed indefinitely. Rumors suggested her fiancé balked at the idea of a big spectacle after witnessing the barn meltdown. Another rumor said they planned a quiet courthouse ceremony instead. The details didn't matter much to me. If anything, I hoped Karen would learn a lesson about how forcibly taking what isn't hers can backfire. People who crave power rarely reflect deeply, but a fiasco of that magnitude might be the exception. Life moved on. My daily horse routines returned to their usual peaceful flow: feeding, grooming, occasional rides through the backfield. Storm remained a bit more jumpy around loud noises, so I spent extra time desensitizing her. Over weeks of gentle care, I could see her old confidence returning. I too felt more secure, though a kernel of wariness stayed with me. When you've seen how quickly an HOA Karen can disrupt your peace, you learn to stay alert. Then, one lovely autumn afternoon, Luke stopped by for coffee. We sat on my porch, gazing at the barn as leaves drifted from the maple trees. "You know," he said, sipping his mug, "the neighborhood's never been better. People feel empowered to speak up for themselves. Even the new board is more transparent about finances and decisions. It's like the fiasco was a catalyst." I nodded, letting my gaze rest on the barn doors we'd painstakingly repaired. Funny how a bachelorette party turned everything upside down. It was horrific at the time, but maybe it pushed us all forward. Luke laughed softly. "Guess that's the silver lining." We both stared at Storm grazing by the fence, her coat shining in the afternoon light. She glanced our way as if to acknowledge us, then resumed happily munching. The final note of closure came in a letter from the police, informing me that the case involving trespassing and property damage was considered resolved unless I wished to press further criminal charges. I decided not to. Karen had been stripped of her authority, widely exposed for her wrongdoing, and faced the social consequences of her actions. I felt that was enough. Holding on to resentment wouldn't bring me peace. On a whim, I posted a short message on the community forum. "Thanks to everyone who helped restore my barn, supported my horse's well-being, and demanded accountability. Let's continue making our neighborhood a place where we respect each other's boundaries and live in peace." The responses were overwhelmingly positive. Even new residents chimed in, relieved that the horror stories they'd heard were now in the past. So there it is, the story of how Karen, the all-powerful HOA president, commandeered my barn for her bachelorette party, and how my horse's well-timed kick ended up chasing out a group of rowdy groomsmen, exposing Karen's overreach for all to see. Was it terrifying? Absolutely. Was it hilarious in hindsight? A bit, yes. I still recall the stunned expressions as they realized the barn wasn't a safe party playground, but the domain of large animals spooked by pounding music. The lasting lesson for me is about standing firm, no matter how intimidating the opponent. Karen waged her campaign through threats and manipulated rules. She relied on people's compliance. But once I drew a firm line, supported by loyal friends, calm evidence, and a few honest police officers, her entire scheme crumbled. It was a messy victory, but a victory nonetheless. Today I can walk into my barn at sunrise and hear only the quiet rustle of hay, the soft nickers of horses ready for breakfast. I can close my eyes, breathe in the familiar scent of warm straw, and know this space truly belongs to me. No disco ball or neon lights intrude on my sanctuary. Instead, there's just the comforting rhythm of animals content in their rightful home. And that, I believe, is the best ending I could have hoped for. My barn intact, my horses safe, and a neighborhood that learned the value of respecting personal boundaries. Karen may still lurk somewhere, possibly planning her next move or wallowing in her downfall, but I'm no longer consumed by fear of her. If she ever tries another stunt, I'll be ready to defend what's mine, just as I was the day she waltzed in, proclaiming authority she never truly had. And if she needs a reminder, Storm's hooves will speak louder than any hollow threat. In the meantime, I share my story so others remember that even the loudest Karen can be stopped when you stand your ground with a firm no and have the facts on your side. My horses taught me that sometimes a well-placed kick, literal or metaphorical, can set things right. May this tale encourage anyone else facing an overbearing HOA bully. You're not alone, and you can fight back. Because at the end of the day, no one should have to surrender their refuge, their peace, or their barn to an entitled neighbor convinced she owns the world.